今天接着下来，我们要来跟大家谈一谈未来的明日产业。我相信各位大家都了解，那么在最近的这个投资活动当中呢，所有跟能源有关的，在过去这2年，台湾所流行的产业当中，太阳能是扮演非常重要的角色。我们看到台湾的这个茂迪啦、益通啦，都有非常强劲的上涨。那么在全世界当中呢，我们也看到跟水资源有关的公司啊，台湾这个类股很少，但是呢，水资源在全球啊都有很大幅度的上涨。我们看到彭博这个在把这个全世界的水资源类股有11档呢所构成的这个指数啊，最近从98点，那么一直涨到241点。那么第3个呢，我们看到跟环境污染有关的，那么这一些族群呢，都在全世界有非常出色的表现。我们台湾在今年当中有一档叫中宇环保，那么也曾经啊有创造过相当大的涨幅。那么从能源到水资源，一直到环境的环保议题呢，这3大都是人类在目前现阶段呢最受到大家瞩目的一个焦点。那么今天我们非常高兴，请到来自海外的这个全球第2大的资产管理集团的这个安联集团的全球研究团队的总监，这个 Gunnar Miller 先生呢，来到我们节目当中啊。我想我们非常感谢他这个远道而来。那么今天我们要针对这个大家所关切的3大未来趋势的产业，跟这个 Miller 先生来讨论。我想在介绍 Miller 先生呢，他是1996年到2001年连续6年拿到 US Institutional 这个 Investor 的这个调查的第1名。另外在1994年到2001年，他连续8年这个 Greenwich 的 Associate 这个调查的前4大的分析师，所以他在国外呢受到大家高度的重视。所以呢，今天来到台湾，我想我们非常高兴呢，能够邀请到 Miller 先生呢来到我们节目当中。这个Miller 先生好啊，好，我想 Hello Miller， 第一个要请教Miller先生的问题，我们可以看到全世界的这个在最近几年当中，所有这个绿色能源产业，包括环保，包括水资源啊，包括现在我们看到这太阳能啊，这一些都在过去几年受到全世界高度的重视。这个商机到底有多大？你能不能跟我们观众朋友来讲一下？
Well, we view the trends sectors. The main eco-trend sectors are eco-energy, pollution control, and clean water.
Yeah.
And these themes have, just to give some very fun facts, if you will, related to them, the estimated market for renewable energy worldwide is $625 billion USD by 2010, tripling to 1.9 trillion by 2020. More immediately, the European Union, where I'm based, wants to cover 12% of its total energy consumption with new kinds of energy. Today, that's probably 1, maybe 2% maximum. So the immediate opportunities over the next 5 years are very large, and the opportunities over the next 10 to 20 years are very large. In the solar range, Applied Materials, which is a company I used to cover in my semiconductor life, has recently announced that they would like to enter the manufacturing equipment for solar panels. They stated on their announcement they view the solar market as growing 25 to 30% per year for the next 25 years. So these are very, very big numbers. In the wind sector alone worldwide, the wind power market grew 43% year over year in 2005. And that's just the alternative energy segment. The pollution control segment, and it's not just global concepts like the Kyoto Protocol. It's the EU Recycling Directive, which requires all computers to be brought back, all handsets to be brought back, the reduction of hazardous substances amounts. And when you look at the 10 new EU member states alone, you're talking about 80 to 110 billion euros worth of investments, more than half of which have to be in the water sector. So these numbers are rather staggering when you look over the next 5 to 15 to 20 years. Our job as fund managers is to try to get a manageable set of investments who can take advantage of this. In clean water in the U.S. alone, we'll have to invest $280 billion US for infrastructure alone. 200 billion in China, mainland China's water infrastructure in the next 15 to 20 years. And the overall World Bank estimate of investments on the water shortage, which is a big global theme, are 600 billion euros. And just a fun fact, as the developing world comes up to the developed world's levels, they all want similar end products that we're used to, and it takes 22 glasses of water to make one glass of orange juice. And so when you look at these numbers, it's the main driver of EcoTrends is demographics, but not just population demographics, but economic demographics.
好，我们都知道米勒先生过去是非常有名的半导体产业的分析师，你到台湾也是第4次了哈。第一个要先请教米勒先生是你看的台湾的印象。第二个是用半导体的观点来看，这个在过去的这个太阳能的产业从德国开始发展，那么在今年美国的加州政府通过能源法案之后呢，看起来这个太阳能产业啊是有一段非常蓬勃的发展。这个产业的这个现在发展到这里，你对它的未来有什么评价？
Well, in answer to your first question, I first started traveling to Taiwan as the Hsinchu Science Park development really began, and I witnessed the construction of the first TSMC fab, the founding of the foundry business, the dominance of the motherboard business. So every time I come back to Taiwan, I get the impression it's more and more prosperous. Number one. Number two, very much like when one makes repeated trips to developing China, you notice that the quality of life continues to go up. My last trip to Taiwan was in October of 2002, and if I'm not mistaken, Taipei 101 was still in the finishing stages. And now it's there. The taxis are a bit bigger. All of the trends in terms of people in societies where wealth continues to grow continue to demand the kinds of services and quality of life that we see everywhere else in the developed world. But an interesting statistic about Taiwan that very much surprised me, on the positive side, Taiwan has always had to be, unlike mainland China, very self-dependent and has its own nuclear development program, and in terms of providing power infrastructure, is probably in reasonably good shape. In mainland China, you still see a lot of dirty coal plants being built, and it's a much more tenuous situation. That being said, in the clean water side, Taiwan still dumps 90% of its water directly untreated, and that's something that when you look at the overall infrastructure worldwide, most people don't realize that 30 to 40% of all water is lost simply through leakages and inefficiency in very old systems. The London water system, the New York water system. It's a problem that isn't simply the emerging world or the middle stage industrializing world. It's very true for late stage mature economies such as you see in Western Europe, Taiwan, Japan. So my main impression is that I'm very pleased to be on the show because it definitely shows that there are interested investors who have built wealth through very hard work, and hopefully what we can help people do is take it to the next stage and invest in the next wave, which takes us away from simply purely investing in the IT and computing sector of technology and brings us into energy, clean water, and pollution control. And the second question, I believe, had to do with the wafer, the cyclicality of the wafer business. The silicon wafer, single crystal silicon wafer business has been almost solely dedicated for many decades simply to the semiconductor business. Also, we have seen the wafer size transitions starting with very small 4-inch wafers, and eventually now most modern factories, most fabrication facilities are using 12-inch or 200 millimeter wafers. Into this mix suddenly comes the solar industry, adds its demand in, and the rates of return of the silicon wafer business have always been subpar compared to those of the semiconductor device industry. It's a more commoditized business. It's less direct value added. All of a sudden, here comes this massive demand from the solar business, coming mainly from German subsidies, from as you mentioned, the California subsidies, and that created an artificial situation where all of a sudden wafer prices became very, very high. These prices were passed on to the consumer, and the stock prices of the wafer manufacturers went very high. Recently, as more of this supply is brought online, as more of the wafer manufacturers realize they can use older facilities, older 6-inch, 4-inch facilities to still provide into the finished panel market, the situation of wafer prices have begun to drop. Well, the question is very much like DRAM in 1995. In 1995, PC makers were DRAM constrained, so they were under-configuring machines. At the peak, DRAM was 50% of the price of a PC. Within 2 years, it was back down to 10% again, but PCs then became very powerful, relatively inexpensive, and the unit volumes exploded. We think we're going to go through similar stages where we are going to have a 25 to 30% growth rate for solar, around which you may have some cyclicality in the overall components. But very much like the technology industry, we don't believe the issue is within demand ultimately. It's ultimately to do with the supply and inventory dynamics of the providers.
第三个问题请教米勒先生，我们看到在能源的，尤其替代能源产业在最近几年，我们先看到像 Bill Gates 那么他去投资这个乙醇的工厂那么全世界都在想，油价从一桶从$16.7，那么这一次涨到78.4。你认为石油的这个价格最近回到63.3毛3了之后油价未来的走法，你个人怎么看？还有呢，全世界大家都在寻找替代性的能源，这个产业未来所能够整个兴起的这个商机到底有多大？
Well, that's a very good question because it's not only Bill Gates who's getting into this general arena. It's also the Google guys, the Google billionaires. One of the biggest high-profile investments they've made is they've made a direct investment into a microsolar company that has great promise to provide non-silicon-based solar energy or solar panel solutions, which of course would solve the pricing and availability problem for silicon very quickly if that were to happen. The reality is I covered for quite a number of years a very cyclical industry in semiconductors, and it would go from feast to famine, but the overall trend line went up. Similarly, the oil price has seasonal dynamics. It has political and exogenous shocks dynamics that cause the price to fluctuate. But the most important aspect is that most analysts are building in oil. They started about 18 months to 12 months ago building their models around perhaps $35 to $45 per barrel oil. Over the course of the last 12 to 18 months, they've grudgingly brought it up to sort of 55. And as of a month or two ago, we were up to 80. So the question is, we have the reality of the spot pricing, very much like DRAM. We have the reality of spot pricing here and the reality of the production and inventory dynamic here. But one thing is very clear to us as a firm, and this covers not only the EcoTrends fund, but also some of the various energy funds and raw material funds we look at, and that is that incremental discoveries of oil are becoming more difficult. The production technology has to get more sophisticated to try to get more out of the ground. All the easy oil has been taken out. Remember those old movies in Texas in the early days when you'd stick a pipe in the ground and the oil would come, the pressure was so high the oil would come spurting out of the ground. Now increasingly the oil majors find themselves doing deep water exploration, going to more and more exotic and more dangerous locations with uncertain governments. And you look at what's happening with Venezuela, adding to political uncertainty in the Middle East. All this put together means that oil may go from 80 back down to 68, but that's probably just a question of the end of the U.S. driving season at the end of this year. The overall trend is still clear, and the commitment of not only governments but individuals to reducing their dependence on fossil fuels should go on regardless of the price. One fun fact I read recently is that Brazil has actually reduced its consumption of gasoline by, I'll have to check this statistic, but around a third to 40% by replacing it with cane sugar ethanol. Nothing to do with the oil price or the availability, but more of a feeling that they could reduce their dependence and their foreign trade deficit related to the oil price.
大家很关心一个问题，在台湾我们一般的投资大众对水资源的投资这个相关的公司都不熟悉。但是在全世界来看，我们看到大概从这个最近这几年当中所有跟水资源的开发这个有关的公司股价都有很大幅度的上涨。我们大概看到一个资料，说人类的这个在地球上的污染现在越来越严重。那么现在我看到一个资料，他说1加仑的水能够喝到人的嘴巴大概剩1滴这个水的资源是越来越匮乏。那么现在全世界大家都在很努力在开发这个水资源。你能不能告诉我们，这个在全世界的水资源的这个有关的公司的投资台湾一般的投资人，我们对一般的这个，我们都知道喝矿泉水将来很可能会比这个油还来得贵那水资源的投资应该怎么来投资这个我想请教Miller先生。
Yes, I would imagine that there are two main areas there are two main areas of concentration on the water side. There is, of course, the traditional water utility side of things. And that depends on whether, and I'm not quite certain of the situation in Taiwan specifically, but I think generally in Asia we have not seen the privatization waves of the water utilities that we've seen in Western Europe and into the U.S. So one source of investment are the various direct water utilities, Eon, which owns Thames Water, and not only that, provides a lot of other general utilities besides water as a direct investment. But that's only one element. The second element are the companies that actually provide some of the filtration and treatment equipment. And not to get too much specifically into some of the names, but an example of an operator that you might invest in is something like Aguas de Barcelona, as a progressive operator that's doing a lot of infrastructural improvement, as well as having the ongoing income stream from its customers. And then you have companies like Headwaters and ABB that provide infrastructure into the water purification and into the water treatment systems. And at one point, people didn't realize at the time, and I think it's since been spun, but you would look at companies like Vivendi and others who owned international water treatment systems. And so you can own the water treatment aspects at all elements of the food chain. You can go all the way back to the companies like an ABB, like an ITT, and others who provide actual filtration and treatment equipment. Then you can move that on to the companies who do all of the engineering and construction related to repairing and installing the clean water systems, and then all the way to the companies who actually provide it on a daily basis to the users. And again, for the purposes of the investor, these are very, something like Christ Water Technologies AG is a very small European, German manufacturer of this equipment. Very hard to get information on it. And part of our value added, we hope, as fund managers, is that we can assemble a number of these relatively illiquid, no pun intended, some of these illiquid names into the broader theme and make that at least 25% of our portfolio together, and that way Taiwanese investors who are interested in this exposure can get it through our fund.
我们都知道，你在这个安联集团有一个 sustainability 的这个 research 的团队哦。那么这个 SR 的这个 team 到底怎么应用安联集团的资源来帮全球投资大众找出有关绿能源的投资产业的这个标的？这个是我们怎么来进行
？It is very important to notice that our team is called Sustainability Research. This is very different than SRI. And I need to take a minute and talk about that because SRI, or socially responsible investment, is mainly a negative screening investment approach. In other words, you take an index or you take an existing portfolio and then you screen it for what are determined to be socially undesirable elements from the fund. And we do have some demand from some institutional and retail clients for socially responsible investment. However, in doing our work on socially responsible investment, we started discovering that the definition isn't simply issues like child labor or issues that issues like tobacco and alcohol manufacture. They actually range out into things like transparency, corporate governance, environmental report card, and other things. So the way to get the teams to interact is we want our mainstream research analysts to be taking these social responsibility factors into account when they do research. The problem is they're too busy doing models and working on product competitive analysis, working on management analysis, and they don't often have those tools. At the same time, the people on the SR side didn't have a lot of direct experience as broad investors because they were just running screens. So we sat and thought about this for a while, and we said, well, let's get the best of both worlds. We'll put them together into our main research team. Once they're together in our research team, then our mainstream analysts can learn to incorporate sustainability elements, and our sustainability people can learn to range out beyond the negative screening. So when you look at the composition of our team and how we leverage the internal research resource, a few things pop out. First of all, the manager of this fund, as well as the co-managers who end up helping, have experience. One is a global generalist portfolio manager by background. One is a European fund manager who also has SRI experience. And the other is the head of our SRI group. And when you put that together, it means that they have all of their information sources from their other funds. This fund can starts by looking at 10,000 worldwide names potentially and has to sort it all down to 50 or 60 names. So you need a lot of help. It's not like some specialty or country funds that are self-selecting beforehand, number one. Number two, we have an internal effort called grassroots research. And what grassroots research does is it actually goes out and does background work for our analysts to determine whether or not we're moving in the right direction. And they will go and do work on various themes that we might not have enough time to do. For instance, a hybrid automobile. What is the real interest for hybrid automobiles? Grassroots research will go out and call a few hundred or even a few thousand potential car buyers and ask them. I can't ask my fund manager to pick up the phone and make 1,000 phone calls. I want the fund manager sitting in front, managing the market flows, coming up with the ideas, doing the valuation work. So the leveraging of the internal and external resource, we of course access sell-side research work on this. It's a third-party check. So it's sort of a three-legged stool, right? We have our external sources, sell-side, company resources, industry work. We have our internal resources, existing fund managers, and a 66-person worldwide research department. And then thirdly, we have this grassroots research which can go do survey work for us.
OK， 好，今天我们访问的米勒先生呢，他从全世界的这个投资的角度来帮我们分析大家所关切的，包括水资源，包括节能产业，包括整个对抗环境污染所创造的新的商机。我想这一些都是大家在未来投资的项目的选择呢非常重要的趋势性的产业。那么米勒先生呢从国外来，那么他把他的投资的经验 今天来跟大家做一个分享，我想我们都受益很多。今天非常感谢米勒先生呢来到我们的节目当中，我们稍微休息一下，再来看看全球的金融市场的新的变化。好，谢谢。